I suppose when you look at it, I'm as spokesperson for Foreign Affairs and Trade on the party, I'm glad again to be speaking with regard to Brexit, but I suppose all of us would rather not be in this position. I think the 23rd of June last year was actually a sad day for the European Union, for Ireland, but in particular for Britain. And I think in particular was the disgraceful and treacherous campaign that was run by the Brexiteers, the lies that were told, frankly, the untruths, the promises that were made that were unrealisable. And now we see the reality of the Article 50 letter that Prime Minister May has moved and submitted to the European Union. And I think for those of us who hoped that we would be able to move through this phase by way of a transition and that cool and calm heads would apply, I think from the British Cabinet in London we have seen that the Brexiteers and the hard Brexiteers have actually won the day insofar as the stance that Britain have taken. I think the idea that Britain would look to remove itself completely from the single market and effectively completely from the customs union means, in real terms, that this is probably the hardest of hard Brexits. Now, we've got to make it very clear, and I certainly do along with my colleagues, that as part of these negotiations that we are on the European Union side of the table. Britain, we have a long-standing relationship with Britain over centuries, most of it not all good, frankly, and we have a shared history, but their history has tended to be imposed upon us to the detriment of the Irish people. Only in recent times has that turned around. Post the independence for the Republic and the Good Friday Agreement itself and the peace process, the peace that we enjoy in the North. But here's another example again of Britain taking a very wrong turn in the road that is going to, in many ways, drastically affect us and has the potential to really damage our own country and to damage the livelihoods and quality of life of our people. So our job as an Oireachtas, our job as a Dáil, and the government's job on behalf of the Irish people is firstly to protect the interests of the Irish people, both in the Republic and in the North, and I'll turn to the North shortly. But if you look at a couple of areas that within this, of the sectors that can be affected, we all know the trade figures. We know the €60 billion a year of trade between Ireland and Britain, which is very, very significant. We know the dependency as well, particularly in the agri-food sector and other sectors. But we're a very big market for Britain too. We're an important market for Britain. We actually run a trade deficit with Britain. So, you know, there is, in the times that I've spent in London, in particular, talking to people who bemoan the situation that they're in now at the moment and who really regret what has happened. Because underneath all those trade figures, at the end of the day, are people's lives, are people's jobs, are people's income, their ability to feed their families, to send their families through education, to pay their mortgages, and to live the life that people aspire to. So it really was a reckless and treacherous act by elements within the Tory party. And now we've got to live with that, but we've got to try to make as good a fist of it as possible. And I think the statements today from the European Union, particularly from the Commission, that we would look at agreeing the terms of the divorce settlement effectively in advance of talks on the future relationship. I understand why that is the position, but I would also hope that in real terms that there will be some overlap, and there will have to be some overlap there as to when someone decides to leave what the new arrangements will be. So turning specifically just to a couple of areas in my own constituency where aviation is so crucially important in Dublin Airport, when you look at the figures, they're absolutely stark. Like 39% of all airline passenger traffic in Ireland is from the UK. The second busiest air route in the world is Dublin-London. The busiest European route is Dublin-London. 15,700 direct jobs from Dublin Airport. Nearly 29 million passengers. And the work that's been done by successive governments, by successive management and staff, most importantly, within Dublin Airport and all the airlines that fly out of the airport, it contributes to 4% of our national GDP. And that is a sector that really, really needs to be looked at. And my concern, Minister, is that the government approach across sectors, and this isn't easy, we could pick any We could pick financial services, we pick agri-food. We've already seen the drop of nearly €600 million in the value of exports, of our exports into Britain. But across all sectors, there are these threats to people's jobs, their livelihoods, their homes, because of Brexit. Now, Michael O'Leary, my colleague Deputy Donnelly, just reminded me that just on the weekend, Michael O'Leary had mentioned, and his view is that there's every possibility that should these negotiations go off a cliff and there is no agreement, that there's every possibility, in his view, that we could have a situation for a number of weeks or months post the 2-year negotiation that the UK would not be able to, that UK airlines or UK flights would not be able to land within the European Union or fly across European airspace. Might sound fanciful, might sound absolutely ridiculous, but the reality of it is Britain has decided to pull out of the open skies policy. So the European Union itself then has to make sure that the safety, that all the mechanisms and agreements, long-standing agreements between EU member states and associate states are actually adhered to. So who is actually going to be the regulator? All of these various things. So if you look at, even with the free movement of goods and people, there's a threat in aviation, a threat to both passenger flights, a threat for freight. Like the UK moving away from what was a liberalised market within the European Union. And as I said, within Dublin Airport, you could take Cork Airport, Belfast. These are major threats. Belfast International Airport, all of these things. The British government haven't taken them into account. But I would ask you, Minister, that the government really needs to respond, as opposed to just regular debates and discussions and statements on this. Now that the British have outlined their plan, or lack thereof, because I still don't believe they know what they want, and they're not sure what they want, we in Ireland have to prioritise what's important to us, to look at the sectors and the risks within those sectors. And I am concerned, we had been led to believe by some economists as well that there will be an upside to Brexit. That we will be able to win jobs, that there will be a stream of financial services and insurance companies opening up in Dublin. And Minister, that actually hasn't happened. That we've lost some. That we were in the running in a number of areas. Some major companies have decided to locate elsewhere. I'm not saying we can win them all, but I'm not convinced that our reaction, our response, and our readiness that we have really been up to scratch. If you look at the agri-food sector, 37% of all Irish food exports exported to the UK. In dairy and beef, it goes up to 50%. So in 2016 already, last year, as I said, it's estimated that nearly €600 million in the value of trade has been wiped off because of the depreciation in sterling. So these are real issues. These are issues that have happened pre the Article 50 letter being submitted. And I would hope, and I do earnestly hope, that both the EU, with us at the table as one of the EU 27, can move towards a reasonable agreement. But I think the fundamental element of that agreement is no one wants to punish the UK, but you cannot be outside the EU and to cherry-pick what is good and to have all that is good without any of the responsibilities. So I cannot see how we can marry access to the single market and free access to that whilst restricting the movement of European Union citizens. That's something that, in my view, I personally could not agree with. Turning to the north very briefly in the time I have left, I would remind you, Minister, that this Dáil here voted on a Sinn Féin motion that was amended and added to by Fianna Fáil to give the north of Ireland special status in the negotiations. This Dáil agreed that, at the very least, that at the outset of our negotiations, that's what we should have been insisting upon. The largest proportion of EU citizens that will be outside the European Union post-Brexit will be in the north of Ireland. We have a duty of care. We're a co-guarantor to the Good Friday Agreement. A citizen born in Belfast is as entitled to their Irish citizenship as I am, or anyone here born in Dublin or anywhere in the 26 counties. But I believe our government gave up on that even before the negotiations started. And I would ask you, earnestly ask you, that if you look at what Spain has been able to achieve, even by way of mention of the fact of Gibraltar and the over-the-top reaction that some of the Tories in the UK have had, that is something that, at the very least, obviously the Spanish had lobbied for mention of Gibraltar. I know we actually have a much stronger case to make a much stronger case to make, because a sizable portion of the people in the north of Ireland have a close and earnest affiliation of citizenship here in Ireland. So, look, this is multifaceted, but I do believe, as negotiations move forward, and I'll conclude, that we need to find a mechanism in the Oireachtas here for our ministers and our government to be reporting back on the various sectors and to actually work actively to protect jobs in the areas that I've mentioned, such as in aviation and in horticulture and agri-food. Thank you.